So this is a edit from the 9/11 Commission. Panelist Fred Fielding interviews TSA Security Civil Aviation Inspector Bogdan Dzakovic, and we're going to see what they have to say regarding this issue, and it's very interesting. This is something that I've been very interested in my initial days of studying the events of 9/11 regarding additional weapons on board. And Fred Fielding is going to inquire what American Airlines executive summary said in the initial hours after the 9/11 attacks.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Fielding.
Thank you for appearing today and helping us. You said in your testimony that at 9/11 you received information that there was a firearm from a credible source.
Yes.
Can you provide us that credible source?
I don't know who specifically it was. However, in the operations center, not anybody could just call us up and say, we think this is what happened. Any information that came to us had to come from either the airlines or an FAA office or the FBI or some other government agency. It wasn't something that just anybody could access. So I personally don't know where that came from, but any information we had came from a credible source.
Well, help me out a little. You're in a room and you hear that somebody else has received that information?
What we had was just a standard operations center, had 4 walls, and on each wall we had big blocks of the butcher paper where whenever anything of substance came in, we would write that information down on the paper. And then when we were putting together the executive summary, without looking at things politically or using any other filtering process, we just wrote down the facts that we had. And one of them was that a gun was on such and such a flight. And the person also identified the seat where the gun was held by the passenger, and that apparently an individual sitting in front of that seat was shot.
So just to add, the seat was, I think, 6A or something like that. And the seat belonged to 9/11 hijacker Satam al-Saskami. Sitting in front of him, I believe at 5A, is none other than Israeli counterterrorism operative Daniel Lewin. Now, that would mean that there was foreknowledge about weapons being on these planes put on by individuals, associates of Al-Qaeda. But at the same time, they had to have known who was sitting in front of that person to shoot him, because Daniel Lewin would have tried to stop the hijacking himself. But considering that there were other additional weapons on planes, such as Flight 77, where there was a report of a gun on there, and of course the testimony of Argonne Security Officer Eric Gill regarding the hijackers trying to board the planes on the tarmac the night prior to 9/11. He identified 2 of the hijackers, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and I think Hamza al-Ghamdi, I think. There were 6 men, 3 dressed as American Airlines employees. This is Logan Airport. So it's plausibly why the FAA, as well as the FBI, would cover this up.
And we just reported that.
You remember who wrote it on the butcher paper?
Yes, it was a lady by the name of, not on the butcher paper, but I know who wrote it on the executive summary.
No, but I'm trying to figure out who received the information and wrote it on the butcher paper.
I really don't know.
How many people were in the room?
Between 15 and 20, I would think.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just switch gears here a little. You made reference to the CAP system.
Think of it like this, okay? Could a mistake have been made? Sure. But I'll be damned if somebody can mistake a gun for something else, right? Now, the 9/11 Truth Movement loves to use holograms, missiles, as if, a plane can't do the job. you would know the difference between a missile and an airplane. You would know the difference between a hologram and a physical airplane, especially to the people on the ground, especially at Shanksville and Pentagon. New York, everyone saw it, but still they catered to this ridiculous notion. So whoever got that information came from on board Flight 11, and that individual wrote it on the butcher paper at the aviation headquarters. So I don't know what you can mistake a gun for.
And we have not had much testimony
It pauses every time I
about
pause.
that today, but from your understanding, how did the CAP system operate on 9/11?
We tested CAPS in the red team, and CAPS is one of the most dangerous systems out there. It gives a totally false sense of protection. And the reason is when you look at CAPS from a red team perspective or from a terrorist perspective, the way you look at it is what criteria do I have to use or to apply to this not to be selected as a CAPS selectee? So, and that's fairly easy to do just by flying around a little bit and testing the system and see if you are made a selectee or not based on CAPS. And I really believe that CAPS is the #1 most dangerous system out there because it just totally gives a false sense of security.
CAPS meaning the Computer Assisted Passenger Pre-Screening System, which was a counterterrorism system in place for the aviation industry. The TSA maintained a watch list prior to it, where they had individuals known to pose or suspected of posing a security risk to airlines. The list itself is used to identify terrorists or suspected terrorists attempting to buy airline tickets aboard aircraft traveling in the United States and to mitigate perceived threats. Now, this is, of course, not the system used currently. They have new systems in place now. The system is now designed by the Office of National Risk Assessment, which is an updated system. And that in turn has a much lengthier list of individuals. Whereas prior to 9/11, there was like maybe 15 people on the list. Meanwhile, you know, it was a lot of individuals that could have been put more on that list had the information been shared to the FAA. Well, whose fault is that? Well, the FBI, Office of National Intelligence, I can go CIA. I could go on.
And CAPS
But what good is that now,
only,
right?
I don't know what the percentage is, but like it would make a selectee out of like 10 to 15% of the population of travelers. What that does, it totally eliminates the other 85 to 90% of the people from further selection other than on a random basis. And it's already been demonstrated that terrorists have the capability to do a little research beforehand, and they will find out what it takes not to be made a selectee by CAPS. And now we have CAPS 2, which I'm not familiar with the specifics, but if it's anywhere near the way CAPS 1 was conducted, it simply is a very dangerous system. The single most effective deterrent against aviation-related terrorism is profiling, the way it used to be called, or now a risk assessment that's conducted by a human being in an interview process with the passenger. And that's not something that you can do with every single passenger, but you can certainly weed people out a little bit. But from my red team experience, being interviewed by an experienced profiler or risk assessment person is the biggest deterrent against aviation-related terrorism.
Well, going back to CAPS, CAPS 1 or whatever it was called at that time. We have reports that 6 of the people, the hijackers, were identified by CAPS.
Right.
So in this case, it didn't eliminate them.
Yeah.
They weren't in the other 85% or whatever it is that went on. So it actually identified them. But then where was the breakdown?
Well, that's part of the problem with CAPS. It makes you a selectee, but if all you're doing is going through the regular screening process without an appropriate interview, an in-depth interview, it really doesn't do anything. And I read that there were 9 people that were made selectees as a result of CAPS, but it's so what?
It was a system.
I mean, it had absolutely no impact, and I don't know how much money CAPS costs. I'm sure it's in the millions of dollars, but it's a totally waste of the money, if not a danger, in my opinion.
Most government systems are a waste of money, especially when it comes to national security. But that's the case with the NSA. Remember the program that Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe had implemented, Loomis, which was thin thread, which was designed to keep, national security safe, along with the identities of people being suspected away from, unjustly used by other agencies. But the NSA scrapped that and went with thin thread, which is a much more costlier system that, eventually failed within a year's time. It was a big moneymaker, though, because a lot of people were behind it with money. Well, there you have it with the FAA. The FAA went with TSA, the Transportation Security Agency, right? Association, which basically was to replace private security firms with security lapses, which was Argenbright Security. In fact, the only person held accountable for anything 9/11 was Frank Argenbright for faulty hiring practices. But, really wasn't his fault totally. I mean, the board didn't let him try to defend himself in the media frenzy, who were trying to blame anybody at this point for 9/11. And he's the owner of Argenbright Security. He got voted out by his board of trustees. And, look, if you're going to blame every single security corporation, private security firm, well, that's also, an unjust position because, a lot of these security firms were pretty decent up until the point of 9/11. 9/11, had the CAP system really been effective, 9/11 wouldn't have happened. But then again, I mean, if the CIA would have shared information with the FBI, or the NSA would have shared information with the CIA and the FBI, 9/11 wouldn't have happened anyway. We had the apparatus in place. It did well. And it failed because of human error, malfeasance, maybe even ignorance, intentionality. I'm not going that far, but my goodness, folks, it really brings out the conspiracy that, certain people within the agencies themselves could have stopped 9/11, but didn't for whatever reason. And thus the questions still linger on. Waste of money.
Well, if you had to identify a single, what would you say was the direct and immediate cause of the 9/11 tragedies? Where was the specific breakdown with this group of hijackers?
The only thing remarkable about what happened on September 11th is how unremarkable their tactics were.
Yeah.
And we proved in the red team that the best way to conduct an operation is to keep it as simple as possible. And they didn't even need box cutters. I mean, they could have just walked onto the plane as a regular passenger and taken over the plane. I mean, without any type of weapon, because there's plenty of weapons on a plane you can use anyway. And apparently some of them also had martial arts training also. But as I put in my whistleblower complaint, what happened on September 11th was not a failure of the system. It was a system that was designed for failure. Every single aspect of it did not work
Bingo.
to either deter or find terrorists.
I have no further questions. Thank you, sir.
Bingo. And there you have it. So it's like you wonder, right? You wonder just how effective the security apparatus could have been. But what I want to do is basically share with you um, something that I want to show you, right? So here we go. This was the executive summary of the American Airlines 11. And what I want to show you is shoot, I want to show you something else. Hold on a minute. I did want to see that. I want to show you that. And I want to highlight something that's right here, marked right here. Now, this is the executive summary of Flight 11. Flight 11 departed today from Boston Logan International Airport. The aircraft type was a Boeing 767. But look at right here, right? The American Airlines FAA Principal Security Inspector was notified by Suzanne Clark of American Airlines corporate headquarters that an onboard flight attendant contacted American Airlines Operations Center and informed that a passenger located in seat 10B, I said 6A, that was wrong, so 10B, shot and killed a passenger in 9B at 9:20 a.m. Now remember, too, here's audio missing from Betty Young's phone call. Betty Young's phone call was like 20-something minutes, I think. But during the 9/11 Commission, they only heard about 9 minutes. So there's about 10 minutes missing. The passenger killed was Daniel Lewin, shot by Satan Balsascami. One bullet was reported to have been fired. The flight headed in the direction of John Kennedy. So there you have it. What, this didn't exist? This is pretty detailed. Wouldn't you say? How come the truth movement never talked about this? Because they don't believe in hijackers. That's why. If you don't have hijackers, you don't have planes. You don't have planes, you don't have a shot passenger. You don't have to study anymore. You figured it out, right? But that's about it, folks. I just wanted to share that with you regarding a gun on board Flight 11 that was used to kill Daniel Lewin. Now, is it true or not? I don't know. But I think that indeed there were guns on board some of these planes just to mitigate and make sure that the crashes happened. All right, guys, thank you very much for tuning in. I'll see you next video, everybody. Take care.